Hey, Stephanie. Welcome. Hi, Madeline. Cindy, Nicole.
Everybody, you'll see on the screen when you come in, there's a poll there for you. And it's just to give us a bit of context as to the situation you're in and how you feel about the current situation. So select the answer that best describes sort of your current state and how you're feeling at the moment.
Hey, Karen. Long time no talk. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, it's fun to see some names, some people we haven't been able to hang out with at a social or otherwise for a while. So
I know.
Fun to see some folks. If you can, in the chat, give us a shout out. Where are you actually? Are you in an office? Are you at home? Are you at the dining room table? Where are you currently in this remote teaming environment?
Great question. I am personally at my kitchen table, and it's messy right now. I've got a lot of projects going, so I'm on one corner of it.
Yeah, sitting on my couch, lol. Perfect. Got a few of those.
Yep. We got Penny's still in her office, but everyone else is at home.
Okay. Half and half. Currently in the office cubicle. Yeah. Betsy, I'm squeezed between the washing machine and the cat food in my laundry room. Maybe that's where the best Wi-Fi is. Who knows? That's incredible.
That's great.
Those of you who are just joining, there's a poll, quick poll on the screen that should be there. Select the answer that best describes your current situation, and then how are you feeling about it at the moment? Okay, so we've got some people who are doing some office and also at home, doing a little bit of floating there. Okay. I'm curious to see how this changes in the next week, Addie, as things sort of start to open up a little bit more, and we'll see what the response is. But
yeah, I'm really interested in that as well. A lot of the focus has been on, restaurants and retail reopening, but what does it look like for offices to reopen? Should be interesting to see. Yeah.
We're just going to give about another minute and a half here, and then we'll get going. So give some time for a few more people to join. If you haven't yet, put in the chat, where are you coming from today? Are you floating between office and home? Are you sitting like Betsy in the laundry room? Where are you currently working from at the moment?
I do see a lot of combos, Dave. Like Karen says, floating between home office, kitchen, and patio. I'm always really jealous when I see someone hop on a team meeting and they're sitting outside. Like, I should be doing that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's not too bad out there today. We'll see if it starts raining, but
yeah, this week doesn't look very promising. But
yeah,
we had a good weekend.
Yeah, nice weekend. About 60 more seconds here, and looking at the time, and we'll get rolling. So if you haven't answered the poll, go ahead and answer that. It looks like almost all of us have answered. A few more people just joining us. Thanks for jumping on. Fun to see some more individuals. Okay. Well, good. Well, let's go ahead. Let's talk about these results as we get going. So it looks like for the majority of us, this is the first time that we have been leading and or working as a remote team member. 68% of us there. I've worked as a part of a remote team before, 32% of us. And it doesn't look like anybody on the call today has ever experienced being part of a remote team. So it's an interesting space for all of us. And I'm happy to hear that there's not anybody hating it at the moment. So that's good. That's a good reflection for us. It is new. I think that it does bring some new challenges, but also some new opportunities that I'll discuss today. And I think, Addie, I'm thinking back to our last webinar about working remotely and best practices for that. And we kind of talked on that call that initially, I think there was a bit of a romanticism around like, oh, I get to work from home. And I've been seeing that sort of taper off for people, but I'm happy to hear that people are not hating it, that they're somewhere between loving and hating it.
Yeah,
But
just kind of enduring, right? Just
yeah,
enduring it.
kind of enduring. So
It is what it is.
yeah. Well, awesome. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. We have two incredible panelists to share about effective remote teaming. And Addie, I'll let you kind of intro about how this webinar came to be. And I'm so excited for us to start this today. So I'll kick it over to you.
Me too. Thank you, Dave, for hosting this. Dave at Coachwell, everybody, if you don't know who this great guy is. He put this one together for us YPs and for the chamber at large. So we're really thankful. If any of you remember when all of this kind of started, we sent out a survey to our young professionals and just asked, what are you guys interested in? What are you struggling with? And one of the top things was working in a team is so different now. Working not just leading teams, but we're all a part of a team. So even if you don't lead a team, you're still functioning in a team mostly. And it's just become much more complicated with tech problems, with Zoom dropping in and out, or Google Hangouts, whatever you're using, and just keeping those relationships alive and connected. So we're really excited for this one. I think it's going to be, like Dave said, some high level teaming stuff all the way down to kind of some of the nitty gritty, how to work well and function well in a team. And something, Dave, that you said to me a few weeks ago was, and you're probably going to go into this a little bit today, I'm excited to hear more, is, working from home just sometimes exposes some of the issues we already had in a team that we didn't really know we had, or that we were just, we were able to kind of smooth over because we all worked together in an office and we could kind of tiptoe around things. And now things are maybe more obvious, where there's communication, distancing, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're thankful and we're excited.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, thanks, Addie. So I'll go ahead and jump in here and take over the screen. We'll see you in a bit, Addie. Thanks.
Thanks.
So I want to start first by, like Addie just said, the objective is for us to gain some practical insight on how we can all be more effective in this remote teaming environment. And so I've been able to bring on some great panelists, and I'm excited for you to meet them in a few minutes here. I want to just inform you of a few things that you can do. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end, so if you can put questions into the Q&A queue so that we can get those prepared for our panelists or for myself at the end of this time. So please do that. Please, I'm going to ask you to put some things in the chat as we go through, even while our panelists are speaking. So stay engaged with the chat there. And I wanted to let you know that what I talk about, and also some of the responses from the panelists will also be in a webinar brief that we'll send out to you all at the end of this. So please take notes, get some ideas, some insights, but know that we'll be sending out a PDF that has some great information about this webinar and what the panelists have shared. So I want to start by piggybacking right on what Addie said and just give a bit of context for the conversation today. So I used to be a language arts teacher. I came out of college and had gotten married right before my senior year, so got married pretty young, and my wife was a teacher, and so I ended up going into teaching for about 7 years. And most of the time I spent as a language arts teacher, and I taught in Bend and also in Redmond. And I've always had a love for writing and reading, and one of the subjects I specifically loved teaching about were literary devices, or specific moves that authors would make to create sort of an experience for the reader. And there's been this concept that keeps coming up for me in the past couple of weeks, and Addie referred to it. There's one specific literary device that I used to teach on, and it's called the foil. And give me a TU if you in the comments or in the chat if you've ever heard of the foil before. But it's a literary device where and let me see if I can explain it as best as possible. It's when a supporting character is deliberately placed in contrast with the main character for the sole purpose of exaggerating both the internal deficiencies as well as the competencies of the main character. And so while this might seem like an interesting concept to start this webinar with, let me kind of tease it out a little bit and explain it. So there are a couple of examples of foils in literature. So George and Lenny in Of Mice and Men would be an example of that. Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter in the Harry Potter series. Han Solo and Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars films. These are, that's an example of a foil where you place these two very different individuals together and it contrasts or reveals the internal deficiencies or strengths of those characters. So here's why this kept coming back to me, and I'm gonna kind of pull it into our current context, because my perspective is that this current crisis is in many ways is acting as sort of the foil for our relationships, for our businesses, for our teams, and even our own leadership effectiveness. And because of its widespread nature, it's sort of revealing and amplifying for all of us our internal competencies and our deficiencies in the various facets of our life, and it's doing it for all of us at the same time. So I think it feels very present. So let me explain it this way. So if you've been feeling like, man, my team is exhibiting a lack of trust as we've moved into this remote environment, I would contend with you that there may have been some of that lack of trust possibly before this crisis, and this crisis is just revealing or amplifying or exaggerating the experience for you as a team. And conversely, if you've been overwhelmed with the amount of generosity, the way in which your teams have been showing resiliency, focus, determination, higher productivity, maybe there was untapped potential before this crisis that is now being revealed that will shape the way in which your team and your organization functions largely into the future. So these may be two extreme examples, but the reality is that this moment of uncertainty and crisis is providing for all of us a moment of contrast, illumination, and assessment that, if properly allowed, will cause us to emerge stronger, not only as individual leaders, but also as team or business units and organizations as a whole. So I wanted to use that concept to give us a bit of high-level context for the conversation. Now, I want to make a quick pivot and share something with you, and this comes out of a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by our good friend Patrick Lencioni. Again, give me a thumbs up or a TU in the comments if you've heard of this book. And I just want to share one little graphic to talk about effective teaming in general. So there is this, he talks about 5 major areas that are really important to focus on for any team, and even more so, like I'm saying, in the midst of this remote teaming environment. So the first one, at the most foundational layer around building a high-performance team is around trust. And when you have absence of trust, that can undermine the function of a team, whether you're remote or not. So the first dysfunction is an absence of trust among team members. And this stems from their unwillingness to possibly be vulnerable with a group. So right now is really interesting because the remedy for absence of trust is actually becoming more human, becoming more transparent. And the benefit and the opportunity for us as teams right now is to build trust. We have an ability for what I call the rise of personalism, and Patrick Lencioni talked about this in a podcast as well. We've been brought into each other's homes in a very drastic way. Even Addie, right, is coming from her home, and many of you are. And so now we can be more human with each other. So my encouragement is, this is a time to be human and build trust. The second dysfunction of a team, whether it's remote or not, is the fear of conflict. The failure to build trust is damaging because it sets the tone for the second dysfunction, the fear of conflict. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. So if you can build trust right now and also have passionate debate, then you can start to take care of these first 2 dysfunctions and build a more effective remote team, and also a team that works in the office together. So demand debate at this moment. And what we've been seeing with the teams that we've been working with is that there's a lot of debate happening. There's a lot of critical decision-making having to happen right now. And again, sometimes debate or conflict gets glossed over when everything is smooth sailing. So this is a time for you to figure out how we build trust and how we have effective conflict that leads to success. The third that I'll go over quickly is if you can build trust and you can figure out how to do conflict, then you can overcome the third dysfunction, which is lack of commitment. A lack of healthy conflict is a problem because it ensures that the third dysfunction of a team, lack of commitment, can be there. Without having aired opinions in the course of passionate and open debate, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement. So we have to build trust. We have to figure out how to have healthy conflict that leads to greater commitment to the vision, purpose, and idea. Again, the opportunity right now for us is that many businesses and many teams are having to really pivot quickly, pivot the business model, pivot the focus, become more lean and mean. And I know that has different types of problems for each business, but there's a lot of commitment happening right now. Can we commit to a common rallying cry to make it through this moment and thrive on the back end of it? So the last two, if you can build trust, figure out how to have productive conflict, commit to a rallying cry, a central point of focus, then you can start to drive accountability and then results. Accountability is when we submit to each other to be accountable for the things that we are doing, the ways in which we're using our time, the projects that we are focusing on, the way in which we show up for a digital meeting or a real meeting. And then we can really start to focus on outcomes, having attention to results at the top of this scale and focusing on how do we drive outcomes for our teams and our organizations. So I wanted to spend just a few minutes here to give us that context to say that all of these things matter. Having trust, healthy conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. This matters if you're a remote team or if you are a team in an office. And I know that some of us will get back to that space at some time, but I know that this brings challenges for us this time, but it also brings this opportunity for us. How can we use this time to become an even more effective team that exhibits all of these characteristics that I'm talking about? So I'm going to stop sharing here. And if you have any specific questions, please put them in the Q&A or anything about that model there. I'm happy to share more of that with you, and that'll be in the notes as well. But wanted to give us that context as we enter into having some discussion with our incredible panelists. So put some questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can answer those at the end. So at this time, I'd love to bring on our two panelists, and I'm so excited to hear from their voice so that I don't dominate our time today. So I want to introduce you, and I'll let them introduce themselves, to Heather McKendry and also Craig Stubblefield. And thank you so much for joining us, both of you. So to start, I'll just let you guys can rock, paper, scissors, or however you want to do it, but let you jump in and go ahead and give us a little bit of your bio, who you are, where you're working right now, and then we'll jump into these 5 questions together.
Sure, I can go.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. First off, I'm sitting downstairs in our sort of guest area, and I'm watching a stormy sky rolling in. So I don't know if the rest of you are seeing this, but it's pretty incredible out there. My name is Heather McKendry, and I'm the Director of Organizational Development at Roughwear here in town. In Roughwear, we have 57 employees globally, 3 of whom are in Vietnam. 4 people who work, well, prior to this, we're a remote sales team. We're all remote now, except for a couple of people that are still going into the office. And we make outdoor adventure gear for dogs and enhance the human and canine experience. My background, moved to Bend almost about 2 years ago. In fact, May 15th, this Friday, is 2 years for me. And couldn't be happier. Moved here with my wife and 2 dogs from Seattle. And grateful to be back in a place that's got a little more outdoor flair to it than Seattle did. So my job at Roughwear is predominantly, I wear 2 hats. One is more the HR sort of policy, procedure, legal side, and then the organizational development side really is around building in resilience and capacity in our people and our teams, allowing people to sort of come to work as a whole and integrated human beings so they don't have to check part of who they are at the door. and just how are we progressing as individuals and as an organization. So that's just a wee bit about me, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, we're great to have you in Bend, 2 years later. Happy to have you here, and then thanks for joining the webinar.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave, for having me as well, and Addie for the intro. My name's Craig Stubblefield. I also am here in Bend, originally from California, Southern California area, and then spent 10 years in the Bay Area, and sort of just kept coming up north. Sort of the more northern I kept going, the happier I was. So right now we're in Bend, and been here for 6 years now, coming on 7. Currently, I am leading product and product design at a tech company called Lookback, and we make a tech tool for other tech companies or any other company with a digital product to help. It's called user research, and so we make a platform to help customers better understand their users, to do things like interviews, record the sort of screen and face and have a conversation and see them use an interface and really understand maybe what they're having trouble with, or so on and so forth. And we have a distributed team all across the globe. We're representing, I think, about 13 time zones, I think, right now, or 10 time zones. So it's pretty spread out, and there's a lot of sort of remote coordination that happens. We've been doing this since before COVID, of course. So the company was sort of founded on the premise of remote, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And so we found that we're pretty sort of pandemic friendly, which is a weird thing to discover as a team, is that we're already sort of familiar with working this way. And so we have a lot of customers who are learning how to do this along the way. It's been really fun to partner with our own customers and even some of our local businesses here in Bend. A lot of friends of mine in try to getting into that journey. And so I'm just really glad to talk about this topic, because it is hot right now. It's not easy. Sometimes it's not intuitive, but it's really, really great when you start to, grease the gears and things start moving. I think it can be a really, really good thing. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good. So our first question here, and you both sort of touched on it a little bit, is sort of what is your organization's policy, or maybe what was it beforehand with remote working and remote teaming, and has this always been the case, or is this new now? So how has what was your organization's policy even prior to this, and how has it adapted in the current context?
Yeah, so when I came on board about 2 years ago, we realized that a lot of our policies needed updating. And one of them that we looked at was the working remotely. And, it actually says in our employee handbook that we believe that the best work happens when we're in person. So we made a subtle shift to it, which was, this literally just happened a few months before now, just basically allowing people to work from home when sort of life moments occurred, right? So my dog had surgery, and I want to work from home, but be there with my dog just to monitor. I'm taking a friend to the hospital and I can still work. I'm just going to be in the waiting room, or I'm not feeling well. I'm well enough to work, but I want to keep my germs to myself. So that was literally it is pouring outside right now. That is literally the trajectory that we went on. And then March 13th was our last day in the office together as a group. And here we are starting week 9 of this. And so what we're finding is that different people are loving it. Different people aren't liking it. We're going through some, it just kind of changes by the hour for people based upon what's going on for them. But I do believe that as we start to look at sort of a slow and methodical approach to going back into the office and what that looks like, remote working is absolutely, we're going to blow apart our policy and completely rewrite it. It's really changed the myth for some of the leaders in our organization who thought that we all need to be together. So stay tuned on that for us. It'll definitely be a new policy out of this pandemic that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, that's amazing, Heather. What a wild shift. Craig, give us your experience.
Yeah, it's interesting for a company that's already been remote for a while to have a different set of circumstances thrust upon our teammates who, we work from home, or a lot of people in our company have an office outside of their home, because they're going to be more productive there. And so policy wise, we've always supported this premise that the best work gets done when everyone's in the context that they need to do their best work, and when the environment supports that, and that could be anything. So sometimes that has been an in-person office. We have had in the past and at different times sort of a sales team office, down in the Bay Area where most of our customers are, and in-person meetings and coordination. And things are changing such rapid pace. Sometimes it's just better for people to be there and be in person. Well, something that's happened for us recently is when our work has been sort of integrated into our lives as remote workers, our sort of the thing we rely on for sanity is turning work off, right? If you can't leave the office because you always have the office with you, it's really important to be able to turn work off and have some life balance and sort of disconnect. Well, in the current climate, that's been really difficult, of course, because people don't have things to do. You can't go, it's difficult to get out of your house or to go somewhere and sort of disconnect from work. And so we've been working really hard to manage that. How do we take time off? And taking a week off and just sitting at home isn't the most relaxing thing to do. So we've been encouraging people to take 3-day weekends and take a Friday for life admin, do what you need to do, take half days, because a long stretch of being home alone isn't necessarily good, when sometimes your connection to your work community might be a critical part of your sort of social life. But policy wise, we have a lot of flexibility. We do have standards that everyone sort of, as a guide, that everyone gets. We have budgets for people to have offices. And we've been doing this for 7 years about now at the company. So it's been about 7 years old, and it's been remote from the beginning. And we do meetups 2 to 3 times a year where we bring all the company to one place and spend about a week, just focus on relationship building and just focused on how we work together. We just basically don't work on actual projects or anything like that. We just focus on getting to know each other, building relationships, and then optimizing how we will go back and do work together later, and having those types of strategic discussions. Yeah. So I'd say, to answer your question, the policy has been, we haven't needed to change anything, except that we've been needing to encourage people to take more time off, because sort of work is there and it's the only thing I can do, and people are getting pretty drained actually. And so we're having to actively monitor and police people. Hey, you seem tired. Are you doing okay? What do you need? And just recently we did a company promotion to spend $100 on a local business, to support local communities all around the world, go get dinner, support a local toy company or a bookstore or something. And that's been amazing. People have been sharing those type of activities just to get out of the office and go do something in your community as best you can in the current climate.
Yeah. Yeah. So sounds like some different experience. Like you're saying, Heather, it's sort of dispelled the myth for you maybe around the effectiveness of remote working. And then Craig, you guys were already in a remote working space, but it's been compressed now that it's like, now I'm at home, as opposed to being able to be maybe in a different context. But you guys have gotten comfortable with that space. So I do want to hear and sort of what has been your experience for you personally now? You said, Heather, you're 9 weeks into this space. So what's been your experience now with leading this team remotely and being a member of a remote team? How's that been for you?
Yeah, definitely. Can you hear me okay?
Got it. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. So, I'm a leader who's sort of, I lead by wandering around. And I've, and what that allows for is spontaneous connection with a swath of people. We're in pods of 6, so I can walk by to talk to one person and kind of hear what's going on. And, and I believe that my role very much is to sort of sense and respond. And so there's a lot of intuition in my role in figuring out how people are individually, and then sort of what's the larger organizational story? How are people doing? What's going on? What am I hearing? And so this remote working landscape has changed that immensely for me. A tool that I've been using to help with that is sort of set aside a employee health and well-being team. So I've got a cross-functional team that I'm working with people who are really focused on how is everybody doing, not just like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm good. No, hey, how are you really doing? And we've put together 4 surveys now, and they've, it's helped us figure out, are we communicating frequently enough? Are we communicating the right things that you need to hear? How are you doing emotionally? What do you need for ongoing support? And it's allowed us to kind of tailor our all hands meetings to address what we're hearing. And then in addition, we're still working to tend to our culture through events that aren't work related. We have a group, they're sort of our culture club called the Wolfpack at Roughwear. And they put together a lot of events. And so we met week 1 and went right into, how do we do what we normally do, but do it in a virtual realm. And so that's been helping us keep that sort of connection point of our culture alive. I would say being a team member and a team leader in this virtual realm has been interesting on another front. What I've noticed is that when I'm presenting, I can no longer see the faces of the people who are in my audience. And so when I ask a question to the group and no one responds, it's hard to know if people are really listening and really getting it. And so I've had to change my style to include different questions to make sure the audience is still with me. And as a leader, it's good to know that this is how your team might be feeling in a meeting too. They might be having a hard time engaging, and they might be just having a difficult time following, and maybe they feel weird about interrupting and asking a question. So I would say, as a team member and a team leader, be more vocal than you think you need to be in a non-disruptive way. Ask for feedback. Ask for more feedback than you probably ever have. And then, Craig, you had mentioned something about the self-care. I agree with that. That's been the one thing that we've been paying attention to, is that people are actually working harder and longer. And so just reminding people to disconnect. So that's been my experience with leading and then being a part of a team member of a remote team.
That's great.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on something Heather said as well, and I think is really wise, is, a lot of our in-person mechanics just don't map well to remote. Even though we're trying to do the same things, it's different to be in the room with a person or a group of people. And you can read the room. You can see if someone feels uncomfortable by maybe body language, or they're being quieter than they usually are, in a room. You can sort of really dynamically adapt to that information. The human brain is constantly subconsciously processing all of that information in a very natural way when we're in person. When we map these same things to a remote video call, those things don't come through. It's like a filter. There's a huge filter between you and the people you're engaging with. Even now here would be a very different dynamic in person, right? And I love what Heather said about the sort of check-ins. Because that information is more difficult, it's not sort of just passing through us subconsciously and becoming more evident. I mean, already in an in-person environment, you do need to lean into those things and ask questions, but especially with that filter up of tools that kind of keep us separated a little bit, I would say you have to exponentially increase the number of times in which you're checking in with someone. How are you really doing one-on-one? So if you only did that once a week, do it 5 times a week. Check in on your people who you directly talk to once a day. It might seem a little crazy, but I think over communication there is always better when it comes to sort of the human health of a person. Check in on that and make sure that there's a focus and emphasis there. Because trust is built in ways that we usually don't really perceive or think about. When I'm sitting in a room with someone, they can just sort of sense, oh, I remember Dave's a good guy. He cares about me. I can just sense it in his body language and things like that. We don't have that remote, so we have to go to great lengths to make sure that's being felt on the other side. as well. And just as well as Heather was mentioning, group meetings are different as well. That's a great point, because usually people feel, attendees of a meeting may feel comfortable raising their hand or uncomfortable, but you can sense that they are, and maybe pull it out of some people or things like that. But in a group video meeting or whatever tool you're using, you know, I like to stop meetings and just say, I start the beginning, middle, and end. How's everyone feeling right now about this meeting? Everyone doing okay? I'll stop in the middle and say, everyone feeling okay right now? You know, you really have to pull it out. And some people might, I had someone this morning say, you know, I'm really struggling on my own energy here. I'm just, you know, I'm spacing out, and like I've had so many video meetings, and it actually took the air pressure, sort of air out of the room a little bit in a good way. Everyone's totally feeling the same way, you know? And so we just adjusted the agenda. Let's take some of these things off the schedule. Let's move it to an async thing. So I think these are really, really critical points. And I think even more critical for me, running a remote team and working remotely, is clarity is absolutely crucial. Clarity and repetition are absolutely crucial for people to feel on the same page. And we'll get into it in a little bit. But I find that remote sort of challenges all the sort of core leadership qualities that you would have even in person, to actually step in and lean into those things even more, right? Because you are working with people. And it's a big opportunity to make sure that, to step into and make sure that people are feeling cared about, but also there's clarity in communication. It just takes more effort. And we can get to the benefits of that in a little bit.
So I'm hearing some themes of obviously lots more communication, lots more feedback, whether that's one-on-one or team, that is crucial at this moment. But because what we're missing, right, is the, hey, we're all, you know, we're hanging out, grabbing coffee together, and we're having just that free flow of conversation. And so how do we provide for that type of conversation and community? While at the same time, like you're saying, Craig, there's got to be clarity too, clarity of communication, efficiencies around some communication and tasks and projects. So that's there as well. But hearing you guys talk about even that self-care and like you said, Heather, you got to pull the feedback out. How are you doing on this meeting? Is this meeting working for you? Is it not? Where are we going? So some of the questions that I'm excited to get to talk about that specifically. So as I look at the next couple questions, you know, the first two were a little bit more high level. Let's get sort of down to some best practices around a couple things. So first of all, what have you found to be sort of detrimental to creating an effective remote working team and culture? And so let's start there. I know it's maybe the negative, but I want to end on the successful elements. So what are some things that you've seen that are sort of the no-nos? Like what's been detrimental for creating that effective remote team and culture?
Yeah. So Craig talked about it a little bit, just the concept of trust. You know, I think, you know, I talked to some of my colleagues or friends, and where there's just, there can tend to be sort of a new cultural norm that takes place where, you know, as a leader, thinking that your people are just running the clock or not working as hard as when they're in the office can be detrimental to team trust. So, you know, if you are looking for somebody through a chat and you're not finding them, just trust that they're doing what they need to do. Either they've stepped away to take a walk, whatever, maybe they're on a phone call, you know. So I think if you're thinking that way, or if I'm thinking that way, if any of us are thinking that way, there's probably other things going on in the culture that need to be addressed first, just around the concept of trust. And that will, you know, become, like you said, Dave, you know, things that are working or maybe weren't working will become a little more amplified in this current situation we find ourselves in. So the other thing I would say is, you know, well, on that note, providing them with the flexibility to take care of themselves and their work, we have found has helped with mental health for people. And sometimes you're kind of booting them outside, you know, like, hey, you're logging off at 3 o'clock today. The rest of the team's got it. So the other thing that I will share is don't assume that your people know how to adjust and pivot to remote work. Help them. ask them if they have the tools, find out what's working and what might be getting in their way, support them as best you can. Couple other things I want to say is don't assume that people are comfortable with the new virtual medium. Understand that some people are highly uncomfortable having their face on a screen and being stared at by 15 other faces. You know, at first we were, you know, sort of having people, okay, everybody have their video on. And then I started doing check-ins with people and found that for some people that was really uncomfortable, and they actually were able to engage at a higher and more comfortable level. So that they, with their camera off, so they could be more present and engage in their own way. So that was kind of an interesting way to just make sure that we're not assuming that what works for me works for the whole team, and that we're being more inclusive based upon somebody's style and comfort level. Now, they may choose to have their video on or not, and that's totally up to them. You know, just really exercise that concept of personal choice. And then lastly, find a way to carry on the culture building events that you were doing in person to a remote setting. So it definitely takes some creativity, but you know, you can set up a team to help brainstorm. We've done just bingo happy half hours. We did one on Cinco de Mayo where we actually spent like the first 10 minutes of that talking about what is Cinco de Mayo, so that we could, you know, learn about another country's heritage. And we've done like dog meme competitions. Right now, everybody's sending in baby photos, and we're going to do like a guessing competition. You know, there's ways to kind of have people go off and do projects on their own and then engage at a different level that's not just on a screen. So look for ways to really allow all different types of people to engage in these events, as opposed to just, guess what, we're going to have another Zoom happy hour, because people are getting pretty burnt out on that. So that's what I have to say about that question, Dave. Thank you.
Heather, and you're striking a chord, I think, with all of us and myself as well. And Kristen in the comments said, yeah, I feel an immense pressure to constantly have my status always as available. And like I'd get in trouble if I take a 5-minute walk away or step away for a few. And I felt that myself too, right? That like there's this pressure that, yeah, somehow I need to be available all the time. And I know, Craig, you're going to speak to this a little bit and have experienced that, but that's hitting a chord for me. And I know that's hitting a chord for everybody else here. I guess the other piece that I would say is, if you in the chat here, I'd be curious to know, before we kind of move on to your responses, Craig, are you guys resonating with some of those sort of detrimental elements that you're experiencing? And are there others that you would add to that list? So I'll just throw that, you guys can throw some ideas in the chat while we move to your response, Craig. Thank you, Heather. That was really cool.
I really enjoyed Heather's perspective on this. You're being newer to remote, or being thrust into remote. You know, I think you're touching on some, I like to think of this stuff from like a first principles perspective, and it's very logical if you break things down. Now, we all know that walking into an office and literally clocking hours walking into an office doesn't get any work done. It doesn't get any work done at all. It has nothing to do with outcomes. You know, people can walk into the office and sit there and do nothing at all, and nothing will get done. And just the same, you know, a status blinker on a chat app somewhere doesn't mean work is or isn't getting done. And we really need to break through that barrier. You know, there's some social, cultural norms pressuring us to feel that way, right? And I think some of this stuff is absolutely detrimental to remote working, because there is a good sense of coming into the office. You know, usually there are good things about it. You come into the office together, there's a sense of camaraderie. You can do other things other than work together. You know, you can go to lunch together, you can walk for coffee. There are so many beneficial things about being in person for a lot of people, for me included. And that just does not map. I think one of the most detrimental things I've seen teams do is try to map specifically the way they work in person right to remote. And that means I'm always online, and there's an expectation that my light is always on. The other ones being not recognizing that we're in a separate time and space, that everyone's going to want to have their camera on, for example. Great example. Not recognizing that, you know, I am working from home. I'm in a different environment. We're not sharing the same office environment anymore, so I can't just expect people to be available. it's a very challenging sort of mental energy that you now can't just bring to your work. You now have a high level anxiety. And I think as a leader, if you're a leader in your own team or your own company, setting an example here to say, these are the outcomes. Let's continually check in to make sure we're getting what we need, to look for those outcomes, and not having an expectation or a standard set from a leadership perspective that it's okay to step away is detrimental to people's health, and not only to people's health, but it's going to be detrimental for your bottom line as a business. It just makes sense to not force people into that anxiety. And so one of the things I've seen folks do is sort of chat, respond, and chat again and chat again. Be respectful to people. Treat it like you're leaving them a voicemail if they're not there, and they're going to get back to you in the flow, and treat people like humans. Humanity shouldn't be tied to an in-person environment. Humanity needs to translate to a remote environment. And I think that's if that doesn't happen, it's going to be detrimental for people. Trust is going to be heavily reduced. And don't expect video calls, for example, as my last point here on this topic, to replace in-person meetings. They absolutely won't. In fact, what I've seen as detrimental to a lot of companies is an increase in meetings since going remote. Significant increase. I asked a friend of mine who has a company size about 50, or he's a manager at the company about 50, and I asked him what's their meeting frequency. He's like, I used to be in meetings about half the day. Now I'm in meetings like the entire day. And this is detrimental, and this is why, is because now people are stressed out. Video meetings cause like 200 to 400% more fatigue in people statistically than in-person meetings, because of the topics we've already talked about. And so mapping those things directly, in my opinion, that's the most detrimental thing you can do. You should probably be having fewer meetings, actually. We should probably be having meetings where we're checking in on what's complex or unclear. Not let's have a meeting to make a decision over and over, or have a meeting to review content over and over. And people just get tired, and people get worn out really quickly by this. So those are some of the top ones for me.
Yeah, and Courtney, I'm glad that you chatted in here. We have the added element of, like we're also homeschooling our kids, right? We're also taking care of multiple children. I've got a new baby and 2 young kids at home. So it's a different structure too, and that even compresses this even more. But Craig, you bring up a great point, that this is a time to actually figure out why you have meetings and the purpose for them, and what do we do in those meetings? Because there isn't that time for just that sort of, hey, I have a quick question. I'm just going to run over to someone's office and get that immediacy of feedback. So we have to be very efficient with communication and clarity there. So I want to make sure that we've got a couple time for some great questions here. And this is an incredible conversation. I think we could talk for lots of hours here. So for both of you, the opposite question now, and I'm going to kind of compress a couple here. What are some of the successes, or some of the ways in which an effective remote working culture and environment can be created? And for those people who are new, like many of us on this call, what are a few very specific essential best practices that you would recommend to start building that culture? And I think we've each got about 2 minutes or so, and then we'll get to our Q&A.
Great, I'll make it brief. First off, Craig, there was one thing that you said, I'm like, I want that as a bumper sticker. Humanity should translate to the virtual environment. I thought that was so great. And on that note, just exercising grace, patience, and compassion. I get a little sad, when I hear that people are having to work 12-hour days to keep up with their workload, and taking care of schooling their children as well. To me, I just believe as a leader that it is our responsibility to figure out ways to create a more flexible environment. That's just sort of my personal narrative there. But one thing is to think inclusively. Know that the access to random office information isn't happening because we aren't in person. And so don't create inequalities around those who know and those who don't know. We've had to be very aware of that there are things that we're discussing in these meetings. You're not trickling out of a conference room, sort of still talking about it, and people can kind of hear, so just being really intentional that you cascade information across the organization, and to do it frequently as well. Have meetings that don't have an agenda and are purely for white space, conversation, connection, asking questions, kind of like a town hall style. And again, another plug here for continuing culture building events. And then as far as advice that I would give, just know that each person is going through their own ups and downs. There's ups and downs around the pandemic, the virtual environment. I mean, we're on a process here of grief and loss and kind of being in this neutral zone. And then some people are kind of looking ahead to the new normal or the new beginning. Understand that everybody on your team is anywhere in that process, sometimes multiple different places, all throughout the day. Know that people's stuff will come up, meaning limiting thought patterns, insecurities will show up more in a remote environment than in person. And I think some of that gets compounded by the pandemic that we're in as well. And then Dave, another plug for things that weren't working in the office, but you might not have been able to see, they're going to show up in even more presence in a remote setting, but it allows us to kind of get to the heart of some of the matters and look at unhealthy organizational patterns. And then lastly, your previously remote team will feel more included now that everyone's remote. So our 4 sales team members have said that they feel, they typically work remote and come into headquarters every once in a while. They said that they feel more connected now than they ever have because our communication has ramped up. And so that and many other things, we're going to figure out ways to keep that going if and when we go back to a hybrid of in-person and remote. So.
Yeah, Heather, and I'll say one quick point there. Some of our clients who have been in a hybrid environment like that, that was a huge area that they had not looked at before. The way in which that there was sort of this separation for the remote team, and then there was their home team, and being able to bring those together. So I'm glad that you brought up that point. That's really good. Craig,
yeah,
your thoughts?
Well, I'm just not sure if Heather's been leading remote teams for years or decades or what, but just super, super insightful, learning on the fly. I think it has a lot to do with paying attention to people. Heather, you're a people person. You're trying to help structure the organization and the policy to be beneficial for people, because of course, people are our companies. Without people, they are anything. And so I appreciate everything you said. I wanted to add to that. She made a note about sort of documentation or access of information. Yes, in-person offices have survived for centuries now, however we've been doing work with this mind hive thing where you just ask another person or talk to another person. And I used to tell people, don't have any remote employees if you have in-person, if you have an HQ, just have an HQ. Maybe some outside consultants or something, but don't consider someone part of your team that's 2 people remote, 12 people in the office. They're always going to feel alienated. It's okay to have some offices and stuff for in-person get-togethers, but what we like to do is what Dave and I are doing right now. We are actually in 2 different rooms in the same building, because if I was standing in the room with him, there would be a different dynamic between me and him than anyone else. And so what we try to do is encourage people to everyone sort of get on a level playing field and don't let these sort of inequities that already take place in person start to creep into your remote work environment. If you can, everyone jump into their own and level the playing field so everyone can have an equal voice and equal influence in the discussion, so on and so forth. Documentation, I have to say, as soon as I moved to remote fully, I went from sort of hybrid, but really enjoying in-person collaboration for a long time to a remote scenario. And it's crazy to say, but the success of my team and multiple projects absolutely hinges on clear documentation. Like it's insane, actually, access to information in a transparent way, not just I'm only sharing this with these 3 people, But yeah, these 3 people are working on this, but it's categorized in a way where anyone can come access that information, because we don't have an office, we don't have a water cooler, those things aren't happening. So I need to be able to document really well, write really well, and make sure it's done in a way that's very inclusive. So if anyone has questions, I point them to the document. I don't answer their questions because that's one-to-one information in a remote environment. It's not going to be overheard by people or in a meeting. So document, point it back to the document, and you can have threaded discussions on a document. That's really helpful, that everyone can see. And I'm using document loosely, any sort of object, right? That's critical, documentation, orientation around that. And then sometimes you do need to have a real-time in-person meeting to talk some things that are just really complex or difficult through, get everyone together, talk about it, document that discussion, and move on. And that'll save you tons of headaches, I think, if you get into that habit.
Awesome. Well, so let's thank you so much, both of you. So insightful, and I'm learning a lot myself right now. The one question I want to bring up, and this comes anonymous, is I find it much more difficult to deliver constructive feedback when not in person. Any suggestions on how to bring as much humanity as possible to the conversation when you're interacting through a non-human portal? So I love that question. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of delivering effective feedback in this space.
I'm a big fan of this, but I'll let Heather go first. Great question.
Yeah. It's definitely, like we talked about, you can't really, like, there's a filter. You can't like totally see what somebody is experiencing. I guess, I'll speak personally, just at Roughware, we actually have a communication tool that allows us to deal with conflict. And so I personally haven't found that has been more of a challenge. But I think just what I would say is that taking a more slow approach to the lead-in, again, there's this tactical, but I think the human side, the humanity, the grace, the patience, the flexibility, all of that needs to kind of be turned up to volume 10 during this. And so just really being aware that maybe when you're in person, you can just kind of launch right into it with the same style. But I would say just that lead in, and not to be like painful or grueling, because people can tell, like, just get to the point. What is it that you want to say? But there's that fine balance of, just kind of the lead into the conversation. Here's what I want to talk about. Here's why I want to talk about it. I want to know how you're feeling when we get through this, so just kind of padding it with a little bit more than you normally would in an in-person setting is probably what I would add to that question.
So Heather, another question that was by Madeline, she talked about, is there a platform to adopt in the work environment? Some people have chimed in Microsoft Teams or Slack. You just mentioned a platform of some sort, or what have you found to be effective in keeping a remote team connected in a digital space?
Yeah, so the communication tool that I'm talking about isn't actually a digital tool. It's a methodology called Clear Partnership and Clear Leadership that, is very similar to like nonviolent communication, or, that's what we've trained our company on that. We're making our way around the org, but we use just the Google Suite. But again, we're having to come up with best practices. When do you email? When do you chat? When do you have a meeting? When do you use Asana, which is for our project management? When do you use there's just all these different forms of communication now. So when do you use which for what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I like the idea of best practices in general for remote. There isn't as many office norms when everyone's remote. So if you can determine best practices so that everyone can sort of have confidence in, this should go over here, this should go here, that's going to reduce anxiety. I think if you have a team or something or have influence on that, guiding best principles, fine, let people break the rules, but at least some guiding best principles to reduce that anxiety. And when it comes to having constructive conversations, well, they're always hard. No one ever really constructive feedback, rather, or critical feedback, or being candid with some bad news or anything like that, or negative performance. Always hard. And in a in-person environment, I found that we can really lean on, again, these sort of trust mechanics that we're really evolutionized for so long. As long as humans have been around, we've gotten really good at these in-person trust mechanics. I can tell this person likes me or cares about me even when they're delivering this news. But when we don't have the sort of, all of our sensors are wrong, right? They're not calibrated for this type of information remote. That I find a really good thing to do. A really good method is to actually methodize that feedback. A tool that Heather's talking about, or a methodology that Heather's talking about, is really good. That way it's not surprise feedback, or it's not surprise, it's not a curveball. I'm not walking on eggshells. I know this is going to be a good feedback session. This is how we do it, actually. It's written out. We start here, we talk about it, we go through it, and it's mapped out so people don't have to feel so anxious. And Heather's reminder again that this is a safe place, I think, has to be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. Hey, we're safe here. This is fine. We can talk about hard stuff, and nothing bad's going to happen because we're just talking about things that might be difficult. All really, really great points.
Awesome. Well, I'm so sad that our time is running out, and I'm going to bring Addie back on in just a minute here. A couple other questions that came up that we'll go ahead and take offline, and we'll send in the notes with some thoughts from all of us. Is there a recommendation or number or ratio for group to staff meetings or individual one-on-ones? So I'll ping you guys later for some thoughts on that, and we'll include it in the notes. And then the other one was specifically for you, Craig. What does that employee come together look like, that in person? And I know that we'll see what that looks like in the future here, but what does that look like, and how do you build that in-person togetherness? So we'll take that offline. Talina also had a great point about, are we going to see businesses shift to more results-based work environments instead of sort of time in seat or time at office? And I'm interested to see us moving that way, because that's what we are always pushing leaders and businesses forward on, is really clarity around results, like I shared at the beginning of our time together. So before I bring Addie on, I just want to say thank you, Heather, so much for joining us in the midst of another day of lots of Zoom meetings. I know that you have more to go to. And Craig, you as well. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insight with us. I really, really appreciate that.
Honored to. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Craig.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Heather, Addie, Dave, and super great questions, everyone. Thanks for putting the questions in chat. It's good to be reminded we're all doing it together, right? And to share information and lean on each other. So really great panel. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much to Heather and Craig and Dave for putting this panel together. You guys were fantastic. I've had a lot of comments about just how humanely you guys are focused and how human-centered you answered all these questions, and that taking into account for, the timeline we're in right now, things just being different, and really a lot of grace, giving a lot of grace, which I just thought was amazing. I forgot to say that this is our expert series. This is one of our expert series that we've been doing. And our amazing sponsors for that are Bend Broadband. And I'm going to put a link in right now. And this will also get sent in an after email as well. But they are doing a giveaway to Barrio. So I want to go over and put my name in right now, just for all of you on this webinar. It's really great. And then for any of the extra, for our next expert webinars as well, they're doing giveaways. So I'm going to put in really quickly our YP website as well. And right on this page, you can see our next upcoming expert events that we have, all sponsored by Bend Broadband. So we're so thankful for our sponsors. Thank you very much. And thanks again, Dave. It was just so helpful. And I took lots of notes.
And me as well. And we, like I said, we will we'll send out some notes with there were 3 questions we didn't get to answer. So I'll get some notes from the panelists, and we'll send that out, as well as their feedback on each one of those points. So thanks for joining today. Appreciate it so much. And thanks, Addie, again, for the opportunity to bring this topic forward.
Thank you all for joining us.
Okay, we'll see y'all later. Have a great rest of the day.